If you've been feeling burnout lately with no idea how to fix it, good news, there's hope. Yes! Today's episode will tell you what burnout is, the warning signs, and the exact steps that you can do to remedy it. Because consistent burnout can have a poor effect on your career, your finances, and even your health. Now, even if you're not feeling burnout right now, you're going to learn crucial things that you can do to prevent it from happening. And who better to teach you than executive coach and speaker Janet Tyler? If you want to bring out the best in your performance in and outside of work with less stress, then this episode is for you. Want even more leadership tips like this in your life? Hit the subscribe button and the bell icon below so you never miss an episode. Welcome to Adventures in Leadership on Kristie TV. This is where high achievers go for the tools, confidence, and motivation to become a successful leader. Let's do this. Janet Tyler is the president of True Depth, an executive coaching and management consulting firm that specializes in working with technology and professional services companies. She's also a national public speaker and certified executive coach, helping those companies achieve the growth that matters to them most. Janet serves as an adjunct faculty member of the Center for Creative Leadership, a global leadership firm, and she's a fellow executive coach for BetterUp out of San Francisco, helping coach multi-billion-dollar companies. Needless to say, Janet has a passion for helping others, and today you're going to get valuable tools to help you and your team avoid burnout and feel less stressed. Hey everybody out there in Adventures in Leadership land. I am really excited for our next guest expert. Her name is Janet Tyler, and as you heard, she is an awesome expert on leadership, and today she's going to talk to us about burnout. And Janet, I am so excited you're here. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here, Kristie.
Now, a lot of people hear the buzzword burnout, I'm burnout, this, that, and the other, but you're the expert. What exactly is burnout?
I mean, it really is a state of complete physical and or emotional exhaustion that completely removes as the individual your sense of accomplishment and personal identity. It's debilitating. And we want to try. I'm on a one woman mission to eradicate it from the workplace if it's at all possible.
Oh yeah. It sounds like it's been a pretty big problem. I mean, you said it's debilitating, so it sounds like
It is. And in fact, the World Health Organization in 2019 classified burnout as on the International Classification of Diseases. It is now on that index, which is a relatively new phenomenon. Literally it just happened in 2019. And burnout costs our healthcare system. The latest statistic was in, I think, 2017, that says it's about $190 billion a year are invested or spent on, individuals' cases of burnout.
Wow. Did you say 190 billion with B?
Billion, yes. It's from Harvard Business Review. I think it's 2017.
Yeah.
Probably on the rise, I would imagine, even today. That was, years ago.
Wow. Okay. So, all right. So it's interesting. I didn't know that it was classified as a disease. So that's obviously news to me. So what can we do to avoid it? So it sounds bad. And I'm sure there are a lot of people out there, watching this right now that have gone through it. But now that you've kind of defined it, what are the warning signs? Like, how do we know that we're burnt out?
Yeah, I like to use, I was actually at my son's school. This is kind of a strange story, but I will get there, I promise.
Yeah, for sure.
And we were sitting through, which is kind of a very sad, hard thing for parents to go through. We were going through like an active shooter, what they were teaching the kids in an active shooter situation.
Okay.
I'll never forget the police officer that was running the program talked about freeze, fight, or flight. And, which is typically what humans and animals do in fear, mostly when they're in a state of fear. And as I was sitting kind of listening to this, I couldn't help but think, wow, there's a lot of correlations between this and burnout. So if you're freezing, you're kind of stuck, you may be feeling sick, tired, definitely anxious, lacking self-care, just, where you used to take, maybe very good care of yourself. You have really limited interest in doing that. And you just have this like inability to rally, like when, you used to be able to go through and like, yeah, I got a huge project at work, and you're kind of, excited. There's some adrenaline that's kicking in. And you can usually like thread the needle. You might be tired for a week or so after. Maybe you work a 60 or 70-hour week to get through that project. But when you're in a state of burnout, that ability to rally is just not there. So what happens is every time you're pushing those adrenal glands to get through that big project or that big task, you're not replenishing them. So that's kind of what freezing looks like. Fighting, and we've all worked with these people who are burned out.
Yeah.
They're very cynical, very low trust in the
Yeah.
organization, lots of back chatter. As soon as they can grab you at the water cooler, you're in for a 10-minute tirade, right?
Right.
They may be, yes, culturally toxic. Some of them, this is interesting, and this was definitely when I suffered from burnout. This was totally me. For some reason, my brain kept telling me to work harder. Leadership books call this like the toxic achiever. So although I was maybe, very unhappy as an individual, my brain kept telling me, Janet, just work harder, work through it. You can push through this. So that's fighting. And then finally, flighting is definitely something that, people might do over a short term, which could be, sadly, alcohol or some kind of drug dependency. You're essentially escaping as much as you can. Sometimes that looks like maybe you have a friend who's feeling burned out. They don't really commit to dates. They're like, well, I could come, but maybe not. I don't know. Or they're really just kind of withdrawing from either the workplace or friends or family, because they're really just stripped of their confidence. So if you remember freeze, fight, or flight, any combination, I always say, if you're having, 3 to 5 or more of those symptoms, if you're not already burned out, you are well on your way to burnout.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't know there was like a process to it, right? Like freeze, flight, or fight.
It really worked well. And I had to thank the police officer. I
Yeah.
said, wow, you really helped me kind of help articulate, like, what is it,
Yeah.
when we're looking at burnout. I don't think that is being done elsewhere. It's just kind of my thing.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, I know I've never heard of it. I mean, and that's good for anybody watching this, is just to kind of, like you said, put it in those sections and say, okay, am I going through any of these? And then what's the difference between being overstressed and then burnout? Like,
yeah, that is
and there's stress everywhere. So how is there a difference, or?
Oh, I think there's a huge difference. And I think that, we often say, oh, I'm so stressed out, or, maybe we even use burnout and stressed out kind of like interchangeably, like they're the same thing.
Yeah.
I can tell you that they are not the same thing. Stress is very temporary. It allows us to get through that huge task or project at work. Those adrenal glands get going, we rise to the challenge. I know, when in my younger days, I loved a good deadline. I used to, do a lot of writing in my career. I still do. But boy, did I love a deadline. Nothing helped push me to get something done than a deadline. That's stress, right? And it comes from the, the caveman days, when the caveman would turn around the corner and a lion or a bear would be there to eat you, that short-term stress. You would, probably freeze, fight, or flight, to escape that situation. Burnout is what happens after long periods of sustained stress, when those adrenal glands, they rise up, but eventually they burn out. Hence the term, you've burned out your adrenal glands. So that ability to rally or get through, is kind of gone, because your adrenal glands are tapped. There's nothing left, to kind of make that happen. Whereas, stress, you've heard cortisol, and there are definitely big issues with, being overstressed all of the time, right? Cortisol, weight gain, heart disease. I mean, there are all kinds of bad medical ailments that happen from being stressed.
Wow.
Burnout, is complete detachment, possibly, moving into some form of clinical depression or anxiety, and literally an inability to work, or quite frankly, to function. I remember when I went through burnout, this was, years ago, 7, 8 years ago, I had a hard time even reading, like really sitting and
Really?
being focused to read for a long period of time. I love to read, but I knew that was a sign, my inability to remain focused, and also just this feeling of like detachment or depersonalization, where you're kind of like floating above the conference room. People are talking, you're in the room, you're there, but you're
Okay.
not really there. Just like, again, like you're floating above the room. So stress, sure, it could kill you prematurely, right? Whereas burnout can, if you're not careful, it can make your life seem not worth living.
Wow.
Big difference, in
Wow.
between the two. And that's why it is on the International Classification of Diseases, because at that point, you're looking at maybe disability, loss of personal income, potential loss of your job. I mean, there are some real, repercussions, to becoming burned out.
Just like you said earlier, I didn't know that it was classified as a disease now. And now, I mean, you've literally just listed a laundry list full of things that are like, okay, you need to get this under control. Or like you said, you could lose your job, you could lose income. I mean, that just sounds like a downward spiral. And I didn't know there was a difference between being overstressed and burnout, but what I'm hearing is stress can be a temporary thing and you can get through it. But if you have stress consistently, a lot of stress consistently, that's where it's like, that's where the downward spiral starts. At least
Yeah.
that's what I'm understanding.
Yes, and that's why a lot of what they call helping careers, medical, mental health professionals,
Okay.
even services firms where you're on call with clients 24/7. I come
Mhm.
from a marketing and communications background, can really result in that, because it's, you may have 6 or 7 clients, right? One goes through an urgent thing, you're stressed, you're helping them through it, and then guess what happens? The next client, so you're constantly on this, I'm stressed to the max, tapping out those adrenal glands. It's very difficult, to come back down, because that adrenaline is going, right? So the result of it, right? Like I said, depression, inability to work, tons of interpersonal conflicts where you're feeling like, my gosh, I'm just fighting with everyone, right? Remember that freeze, fight, or
Yeah.
flight. And then of course, just your confidence is completely eroded, because you're unable to come to the aid if you're a leader of your team or your organization, potentially your family. What I think, for my own personal situation, what kind of happened is I was great with work. But when I started to have some family issues, like everyone goes through, right? I just did not have the resources to cope with both a high pressure job and problems happening in my home, or challenges happening in my home. And that's when burnout, I was just unable, to say, okay, this is stress. It was, essentially turned into complete burnout. It happens to everyone, not everyone, but it happens to a lot of us. Some of us have a shorter, span to come back from burnout. This isn't a statistical piece of evidence. This is more in my private practice, in my executive coaching. I always say, what I observe is, if it took you a year to burn out, it will take at least half that time to recover from burnout.
Wow.
So, I was on a road, of high pressure global travel, running a business, large complicated family system with, stepchildren and the like. And for me, it just did not work anymore for me to just kind of rise to the challenge. I was just unable to rise to the challenge to cope with all of it at one time.
Well, okay, so you touched on something that was really interesting. And a lot of people watching this video are leaders, or they're aspiring to be leaders. You talked about like your individual, right? Okay, this is what you can do. Here's some warning signs. But what can you do as a leader to help your team avoid burnout, like just to avoid it, like try and not have this happen? And then tell me a little bit, okay, so if it does happen, then what do they do about it? So how do
Yeah,
you
well,
avoid it? And then once it's there, how do you help your team deal with that?
yeah. I mean, this is a really interesting thing and something that I am studying right now in my private practice. And it's that teams also suffer burnout. Entire teams. I'm working with leadership teams that are all feeling, overstretched and burned out. So some of the interventions that I might run as a team coach in that situation is first looking at, what I call over or excessive collaboration. Sometimes what happens in an organization is because we want everyone to weigh in and we want people's opinions. And well, guess what happens is if you're not prepared to handle the conflict that might result from a lack of agreement and or alignment, we're constantly kind of doing that battle, right? And again, that creates a ton of emitted cortisol and adrenaline, and before you know it, you have a team that's feeling burned out. So it's like really being conscious of, do I need my whole team to weigh in on this decision, or is this something that I can ask them? They may not totally agree, but maybe they'll align, and we can move on, right? But sometimes that over collaboration can be exhausting. The second thing is just unnecessary meetings. So I just did a study it's like a 110 person professional services firm. I looked at all of the meetings that were happening in the organization. On the monthly, they were spending upwards of $50,000 in billable time sitting in meetings with each other, possibly unnecessary client meetings, really taking an inventory of all of the meetings that are happening. And then also just as the leader, it's focusing. I wrote a blog on this and I call it like the fire starter. We've all worked for these leaders who are like, okay, we're doing this huge change initiative. They light the spark and then they walk away and say, okay, everybody go, figure out how to do this, team. Yeah. They're the fire starter, right? And they're constantly starting these little fires, right? Oh, we got to do this priority. We have this oh, we have to do this initiative or this program. You have say you're under 500 people, you only have so much bandwidth to take on so many initiatives or large scale programs in a year. So if you are thinking about planning, really reduce the urge to kind of over invest in all of those little fires, right? We really want to make sure that we're not overloading, our top team, because when they become overloaded, those symptoms of burnout that happen on teams are a little bit different, but very similar. And I just encourage everyone to remember your doctors, your air traffic controllers, your pastors, all of those people in those caregiving kind of occupations are really susceptible to burnout. And oh, by the way, air traffic controllers, they're pretty important. As we fly on planes, you kind of don't want them to be burned out, because an outcome of burnout is kind of a lack of, performance, right? Like you probably, Kristie, have worked with someone where you say, oh my gosh, this person is a star. They're the top performer. I love working with them.
Yeah.
They become burned out. And what happens is, well, first of all, before that, we overload them because they're a star.
Oh, you can handle more.
Yeah, load it up. Oh, she can handle it. She's a superstar. Well, a year later, we've broken that person, right? So it's also resisting the urge to overload your star or your best employees. You should be protecting them and choosing those initiatives that they're going to run or whatever, execute on for the company.
I've been in that position. I've been that person where they're like, oh, right, you too, Janet. Kristie can handle it. Janet can handle it. Oh, she's so great, because we kind of maybe don't want this other person, or maybe they're brand new and we don't want to train them, so you just give it to her or him. And yeah, I've been there, and And yes, it has burned me out. And then I end up, walking away from that. A lot of the times it's maybe like an association, nonprofit organization or something, voluntary position sometimes. And yeah, it'll burn them out. And I'm glad that you said that also, because that helps prevent. So like when I was
Yeah,
saying, okay, what happens,
great point.
when we do have teams that are burnt out, then how can we prevent it? Well, quit overloading your people. Like, do
Yeah, I mean, it
not
seems so
overload them.
simple, right? I mean, I'm working sometimes with organizations. I'm like, they've been under-resourced
Yeah.
for, a year, 6 months.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying that always hiring more people, because sometimes that can also create burnout for the team, because then they have to train and develop and onboard all of those people. I mean, it's, your team and where you work, right? You know that the best. But sometimes it is really just a symptom of being under-resourced. And then, I would just say making burnout like a safe topic of discussion, right? Like discussing the risks of burnout openly on the team. So, hey, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't give that work to Kristie, because we don't want to burn her out. Some real simple things that you can start to say as the team leader, that will make people think, wow, Susie's really thinking about, by talking about it, right? Or, oh, you know what? I don't think we can take that on this month, because I don't want us to burn out. People will go, whoa, okay. So just kind of putting it out in the open, kind of like, oh, burnout, it's not a thing, or I'm not susceptible. This team is a high performing team. We're not susceptible. These are all the stories, right, that leaders tell themselves. And I know I was definitely one of those people. Just did not think that I was susceptible to burnout. I love my job. I love what I was doing. I love the people I was working with, right? But that was my number one Achilles heel or mistake, is that thinking that I was special in some way. Come to find out years later, no, not so special. Just probably really, really tired.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the big thing with high achievers, right? Is I'm invincible. I can handle it all. I'm super person, and then and
Mm-hmm.
even super person has to land one time, and it's do you want to land nicely or do you want to crash and burn? I mean,
Yeah.
there's that. I'm sure there are a lot of high achievers out there that are thinking exactly just like what you just said of I'm invincible. There's no way I could burn out. And, I might be raising my hand a little bit. What's the number one tip you would tell a high achiever about burnout and how to
Well, yeah. So when I come into
speak to
companies or
them?
associations and I deliver my talk on burnout, I have a huge slide and there's Smokey the Bear is on it. And it literally says only you can prevent burnout. So I don't know if you're a fan of Mel Robbins, who I
Oh,
absolutely
mhm.
adore.
Yeah.
And what Mel Robbins says is no one's coming. No one is going to come and say, Kristie, you look tired today. I mean, maybe.
But not all.
But if you're relying on someone to do that intervention for you, it's probably not going to happen. It really is up to you to identify, okay, I have been stressed for the last 4 months. I've been a very high level of stress. You have to run the intervention. Only you can prevent burnout. And I just think that is kind of an eye opener. Like, oh, you mean this isn't my company's job or my business partner's job or the president of my company? No, it's you. So it's you're having to kind of recognize. There are a lot of tools and some things that I use called the Burnout Buddy Agreement, and it reads kind of like a legal little tongue-in-cheek document that says if I am showing these symptoms for 3 months or more, you're allowed, I designate you, Kristie, to be my burnout buddy and to say, Janet, so maybe someone will come if you make it okay and you give them permission to say, and I always say, I don't mean this, and I say this tongue in cheek,
Yeah.
you're acting crazy, girl. Like, what's going on? You're not yourself.
Yeah.
You've been stressed out, you're short, and irritable, or whatever those symptoms are. And I list all of them in this Burnout Buddy Agreement. So I have designated my husband, who works very closely, not works with me, but I obviously live with him, love him. And so he is my burnout buddy. And so that never happens to me again. So he has full permission to say, I remember this, you gave me this document 3 years ago. It's here. what are you going to do about it? So sometimes we have to allow those, and it works so much better if you're in control of how and who you designate this your burnout buddy to be. So I'm happy to provide that. It's very simple, like I said, kind of a fun document. Most
Yeah.
people say, oh, I listened to Kristie's or I watched Kristie's video on YouTube, and I saw this thing, and it just kind of makes it okay. I've had entire teams use the Burnout Buddy agreement, actually in many different countries now as well, so which is kind of cool.
So yeah, if you're interested in downloading that, make sure that you look for it down in the resources below, and download it. It could help you prevent a lot of that other stuff that Janet just said. I mean, who wants any of that? The anxiety, the depression, the working, at 2% of your capacity. I mean, just no. It's not worth it. And especially, again, that was advice to you high achievers that think that you're perhaps invincible or you can't be burnt out. I would especially invite you to download that. So
yeah, and if you're thinking, I'll just take a couple weeks off, or this summer I have a 2-week vacation with my family. When you're in true burnout, a week or two off isn't going to help you replenish in the way that you need to. And that's super challenging for people to wrap their minds around, which is why we want to prevent burnout before it arrives. You don't want to spend half of the time you were in burnout trying to recover and get those, replenish those lost resources of your ability to work or to focus or to remain engaged in your work in a meaningful way.
Yeah. Prevent it. Prevention is cheaper than cure, as they say, right? I mean, for everything. Prevention.
Yeah, it's very, very true. And then I just say, on that overperformer, I'm sorry, I just wanted to circle back to that because it was such a good point that we were making.
Yeah.
I think oftentimes too, what we do is we may look at, a peer or a colleague, and we just, they're a low performer, for whatever multitude of reasons. And guess what? Is there a possibility that they're just burned out? And that you may need to provide, maybe some interventions and some resources to help them recover, and a little bit of time and space. It might be cheaper, right? That person could turn over, maybe they quit, or you have to separate in any way. But what if, you were able to take a 3-month period, help them regain and replenish? I'm not saying give them the 90 days off, but they may be a very high performer, kind of in disguise of burnout. So, just kind of asking yourself those questions, is like someone who was a high performer who became a low performer, like what's really happening there.
You're talking a lot about prevention, prevention cheaper than cure. Frankly, it's just healthier than that too.
Yes.
Do you have any other good tips for prevention? I mean, I'm kind of asking for myself too. I mean, I know I'm asking for you guys, but I'm kind of asking for myself too. I want to make sure that I avoid burnout. And do you have any top prevention tips?
Yeah, in fact, I would really recommend, trying to evaluate, maybe it's a 2-week time period, looking backwards at your calendar. Who are the people I met with? What time of day? What were the meetings about? And trying to kind of analyze. So I come from a kind of a large professional services background, right? Like that's my jam. I grew up in my business billing hours, right? And so if you're looking at your meetings in that way, what you're doing, who you're with, how you felt, and trying to kind of assess the rhythm of your meetings. Maybe there's a person that, boy, every time you meet with that individual, they get a sad face emoji. You just feel down when you meet with them, or maybe angry.
Okay.
You're going to want to put in, and maybe you can't avoid, maybe that person's your boss. Maybe you can't avoid that meeting.
Yeah.
I would really try to recommend, though, that you put that meeting in a place in your day or in your week where you are typically performing at your best. So for me, I know my biorhythms, I've kind of identified 10 a.m. to about 1 o'clock. That's my sweet spot of when I am at my best, when I'm doing my best work. So I might put that more challenging meeting. I know this is going to sound crazy, but in a time when I know I am mentally my sharpest. And then there are some where I just say, you know what? I can't do these meetings anymore till I feel better. I have to stop, so that's a much more difficult, you're going to need support. but I call it like a burnout time tracker. And I think that is one tool. Another tool would be, and this is super counterintuitive. People always kind of push back on me on this one, but I would say go back and do the work that you love. So if you are, I don't know, an electrician, I always use this example, and you loved to do electrical work. Nothing made you happier than wiring a house, and you got really good at being an electrician. You got so good that other people decided that they wanted to come and work with you and also do electrical work. And then you have a team of 10 electricians that are working for you, and accounting and HR issues. And what happens is you get further and further away from doing the work that you originally loved that called you to the profession to begin with. And so how you can, we call it like efficacy or a sense of efficacy, you can bring it back by going back and, like, if it takes to rewire a house, for me, it's maybe writing again, like putting my fingers on the keyboard and going back to the real basic fundamental of my job. And maybe to me, that is a little less complex, not for everyone, but for me and a lot of the people that I'm coaching. And I say, go back and file that person's taxes, or write that press release or creative brief if you're in that, field. It really kind of helps you reconnect with your purpose and what you really love to do. That can really help build confidence and kind of get you back on that road to recovery. Those are just a couple.
Oh yeah, I'm sure you have like a list this long where you're like, oh yeah.
Yeah, it's probably about a dozen now that I've kind of like analyzed, like what are the besides diet, exercise, sleep, obviously, right? If everybody was doing that, we would never have burnout. We wouldn't even be having this conversation.
Wouldn't
Only it were that simple. And then I guess I'd say if I had to pick a third, I would also say to kind of confront, what happens in burnout is we feel like, oh, I got to feed my family. We place all these like undue pressures on ourselves or even the team that might be suffering burnout. We have to do this. We must. And we do that sometimes with our job because we feel financially we cannot, take a step back.
Yeah, you can't.
Maybe you're a senior vice president, you're really struggling, you're not happy in this job or on this team, or, and so sometimes it's like, just confront the reality of, well, gosh, I drive an Audi now. What would happen if I drove a Chevy? My kids go to a top private school. What would happen if they went, to a good private school, but not to the top private school in the area? Like, start to confront those financial realities and say, well, what would it look like if I had to live on 25 or 30 or 40% less money, less revenue income into my household? A lot of times, if you confront it, you can really deal with it, but it's this unknown, this fear, so like if you do an annual budget, write a budget that says, what would it look like if we were 25% in our income down? There's this song by this artist, James, and it says, if I hadn't seen such riches, I could live with being poor.
Oh, that's a good one.
So think about that, right? It's really hard. I'll use the Audi. You're driving a BMW, and now you're thinking about driving a Chevy. It is hard because it's like, oh, you get kind of wrapped up, right? And what the neighbors have, and what will people say? How will my Facebook, look to other people or whatever,
right?
But I really encourage you to kind of confront that and say, well, what would that be? Most of the time, you're not going to get sicker by driving a less fancy car. Your kids will still love you. So just confront that, and just say, okay, we would be okay. And so that way you're not living in that fear. You don't have that anxiety, which is just like adding fuel to this burnout fire.
It also ties into exactly what I teach in my success coaching programs is very much about purpose. And now that I've heard that, I'm like, okay, I can put that on the thing. Like, hey, if you want to avoid burnout, move back to your purpose, because there's so many, we could have a whole day conversation about this, about the health benefits of really working towards your purpose and just living your purpose. Like you said, if you're an electrician and you love working and doing that, And then all of a sudden you're leading this huge company and that's making you upset and that's not what you feel that you love to do, then yeah, moving back to your purpose. It's exactly, I'm glad. See, I know there was a reason that I asked you to be on the show. You know,
Kismet.
it's exactly what we go through in my coaching program that I tell my clients. So I'm glad that you said that. Is there anything else that you want to add that maybe I didn't ask? Any really good tidbit out there that they should know about burnout?
I mean, I think there are a few, and again, as we evolve in our careers and our work takes over such a big piece of our lives. So I would really encourage that you explore, you know, for me, it was who is Janet, right? So it did, you're right, get back into my purpose, absolutely, but also my hobbies, travel, my spiritual life, and just kind of like exploring interesting stuff. So one of the things that I did was, as I said, I'm taking a class at Wayne State. I'm taking a photography class, and I'm going to have to leave no matter what. I gotta be downtown. Gotta be downtown by 6:30. So it was kind of a cutoff point, and it also was very empowering for me because it was like there was no real reason that I needed to take photography classes. Actually, now I've taken several. I love photography, right? But
Right.
there was a time in my life when really it was my work and my family. And I was kind of proud of that in a strange way. Did not have a lot of outside work relationships other than with my immediate family. I have two sisters. And that was not healthy. And it was only when I left and sold my company and, went to go essentially work for somebody else that I realized, this is really interesting. All these other people have lives like outside, and they don't eat, sleep, and breathe their work all the time the way that I was doing. And because I am a type A personality, high achiever, whatever you want to call us, come to find out, we are more predisposed to suffering from burnout. If you know of someone who is a high achiever, high performer, but also has some perfectionistic tendencies,
Oh,
you're doubling down now on
that's
burnout.
true.
There should be like an alarm sounding over their heads that says, be careful. Literally, playing with fire. And I think the other thing I would maybe encourage, one thing that I did that really helped me is I joined my local Rotary Club in Novi, and I said, "Wow, this is interesting. I'm going to." Just volunteer my time. Whereas for years, I was essentially writing a check, which is still very good, better than doing nothing. But it was only when I went and did the volunteer work. I remember working with our local high school to do donations to provide a new extremity, a new hand for a child that wasn't born with one, but not even necessarily robotic. We're talking in third world countries, and the video reels of these children once they got these 3D printed, essentially body parts, was amazing for me. Going and working with high schoolers and teaching leadership to high school kids, and just seeing how they are experiencing some of the things that maybe Kristie, when we go through some of this with clients in the corporate setting, I'm not saying it's not exciting, but when you're seeing it through a high schooler's eyes, the first time that they've identified what they think their purpose is or something to that effect, it's
Awesome.
awesome.
So
And
cool.
it kind of helps you reconnect and get like recharged. It's different for everybody. But it was only until I kind of adopted this service before self mantra that I kind of understood, oh, wow, there's a whole world, and really went in and touched and did the volunteering work. Really made a huge difference for me, which also feels counterintuitive because you're like, I don't have time to volunteer, I'm far too busy. You know what, you do, because it's part of the recovery from burnout.
All right. Well, I know I learned quite a bit for my own self, and a couple of those tips, I'm definitely going to be taking advantage of those. Tell me a little fun, interesting fact about you. There's going to be a lot of people out there that maybe haven't met you. What's a cool, fun fact story about Janet?
Well, I don't know how fun this is, but I think it's kind
Okay.
of fun. And it's not on my LinkedIn profile because I was 17 years old when I worked for McDonald's.
Okay.
I was one of the youngest second assistant managers at my store. And I just remember loving my job with McDonald's. And my kids are like, oh my God. And I have four, and any of them who have worked in fast food are like, Mom, how did you love? Like, I don't, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I learned so much. I really enjoyed, I was my very early stages of learning to lead teams. I won a Ray Kroc Award. I just really enjoyed, that was like a 2-year period of my life where I worked for McDonald's. And I really do think I learned a lot about people, and talent, and inspiring and motivating teams. It was my very one of my very first forays into leadership. And I just really loved that job. If I could, I would put it on my LinkedIn profile because I learned so much there. And it is kind of a little bit of an inside joke in my family, because my kids will say, oh my gosh, she's telling a McDonald's story. But I do really feel like I learned a lot there. And it was in my very early days of learning about people and leadership. And there was great training and developmental programs, for staffers there. And, I always say, I think every high school age kid should work in fast food, even if it's just 6 months, because it is just such a good experience to work with the general public and see, what does this job really look like, when you're actually doing the work and not just ordering, at the counter, but you're actually doing the work. It's a little lesser known about me, but I'm really proud of it. And I had a great experience.
The question was for you of the little known facts. So I used to work at McDonald's as well, when I was in high school. And I won't go into my experience, obviously, but it was very close to yours, where I was in a leadership position. I loved it. I mean, I really did. I mean, well, there was some parts that were yeah.
I didn't like the way I smelled when I came home. There were a lot of problems. There were definitely, it was not all sunshine and roses.
To everything, but I learned so much. So I just wanted to say, I've come from that world too. Don't, I get it. As soon as you said McDonald's, it's funny. I've held a few, smaller jobs when I was going through high school and college, and I learned there's stuff I still use that I learned from McDonald's in their leadership development program, in their management, when I helped the store manager. I mean, how to make food, the system. I mean, but I learned a lot about customer service, leadership, management, how to run a business, how to run a franchise. I mean, it was really cool stuff. So
yeah, my children always say, like I said, oh, here goes mom again or whatever. But, it really was, it was a unique time too. I mean, I was a young, and just kind of like learning. I was like a sponge right at that time. So I think I just had that job at the right time in my life too. Definitely a lesser known fact. I don't talk about it a lot. I don't know why. But when you asked me that, I'm like, that was the first thing, that came to mind. And it's really, really true.
No, that's good. I mean, you never know. Now it's out there in the world, right? You never know.
Yeah. Who's some other McDonald's alumni, Kristie? Maybe we do a whole LinkedIn group or something. I don't know.
Start sharing like trade secrets and say, okay, what did you learn? What did you learn? And
how are you using it today? Like many years later, but it's kind of interesting if you think about it, right? Like I know there are others probably out there as well.
As we wrap it up, is there any last little takeaways that you want to share? I
mean, I think the most important things, we were just talking about, stress and how that can evolve into burnout if we're not careful. And so the top intervention that you can run on yourself is simple mantra. When you stress, you must rest. So if you finish that big project, or you thread the needle and get through a large assignment or task on the job, or you've been through something very stressful, you have to acknowledge, yes, that was stressful. I'm allowed to rest now, because remember, only you can prevent burnout. So hopefully your watchers and your viewers will kind of really hear that message. When you stress, you must rest.
Wow. Yeah. Yep. That's a good mantra to have, right? Like put a big Post-it somewhere, or put it on your computer or whatever. Yeah. That's really, really good. Well, Jana, how can people get a hold of you?
Pretty simple, actually. My website is truedepth.com, DEPTH.com, truedepth.com. And they can reach me at info@truedepth.com. untitled.com. And I'd be happy to, I check that inbox. It's me personally. I'd be happy to reply or engage in anything that any questions or follow-up that they might have.
Yeah, I hope they reach out to you. I mean, I know there are probably a lot of teams out there that are experiencing burnout and they're like, okay, now what do we do? So you heard it first. Make sure that you contact Janet, get a hold of her. She'll put you on the right path. Well, Janet, I had a lot of fun today. I hope you did
Me
too.
too. Thank you so much. It was really fun to be with you. And also good to know that you're a fellow McDonald's manager as well.
Exactly. There we go. All right. Well, everybody, it was awesome that you made it here, and we will see you next time.
Wow, Janet was 100% on par. And it just goes to show that burnout is a very real problem, but it is manageable. Now, I know I had some aha moments, but what were yours? And more importantly, what action are you going to take to either prevent or remedy burnout? And how are you going to help your team avoid burnout? Let me know in the comments below and give this video a thumbs up. And if you know somebody who would love these leadership tips, hit the share button too and share this with them. If you want to be a confident leader and take things to the next level, but you're not sure where to start, well, let's point you in the right direction. You can schedule a 100% free leadership strategy session with me. We'll go over your goals, your challenges, and the exact steps that you can take to be the leader that you're meant to be. Just click the link in the section below and reserve your spot. There's no better time than now to grow your leadership skills. For more great videos to help you grow, well then just check these out. And don't forget, hit the subscribe button and the bell icon right now so you never miss our weekly episodes. Thanks for watching Kristie TV, and we'll see you next time.